Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is one of the most unique films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This movie is one of the very few MCU films where you can feel the influence of the director on the final product that we see on screen. However, at times this clashes with the other elements of the film, which left me feeling like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is messy, but it is fun. Welcome to Cinemaze, and before we continue, there will be light spoilers for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. I won't be going through major plot details or ruining the cameos and surprises, but I will be touching on some basic plot and character motivations, so beware. The Doctor Strange sequel has had a bit of a rough history, with a change in director and a fair amount of reshoots, and I think you can feel these production issues in the movie itself. But what you can also feel is the unique tonal and visual style from director Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi came onto this project taking over from Scott Derrickson, director of the first Doctor Strange movie, who stepped down due to creative differences. Raimi is most famous for Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man trilogy, but his real root in filmmaking comes from horror, particularly the Evil Dead franchise. And that's the Sam Raimi you feel in here, not Spider-Man Sam Raimi, but the Evil Dead horror Sam Raimi. And honestly, that is brilliant. I love that Marvel didn't restrict the director here and actually let him make an MCU movie with horror elements. And it's not just a little bit of horror, it makes up a big proportion of the film. There are jump scares, brutal deaths, raising the dead, creepy visuals, and overall just a dark tone that is prevalent throughout this whole movie. Some people will not like this. Children, casual audiences, people who don't like horror may genuinely be scared here, and it may put them off this movie. Coming from the MCU, which is often tonally similar, this is really refreshing to me. Raimi does a fantastic job behind the camera and with the horror elements, and I'm really happy he got the chance to shine. Tonally, Raimi is also quite unique, with a campy, cheesy tone, which he often uses to counterbalance the darkness, and I don't think this works quite as well in the MCU. I often criticise the Marvel tone and humour that is usually used too often, so I appreciate that this movie is darker with less jokes. But the jokes which are included are very Sam Raimi, very cheesy one-liners that don't fit in the MCU or even inside this movie, and they feel like they come from a 90s B-movie. I get that that is Sam Raimi's style of humour, and some people really like it, but for me, the humour worked less well than the other elements that Sam Raimi brought to the table. The next great thing here is absolutely Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda, or the Scarlet Witch. She brings so much to this movie, and that's because she has a massive role. In a way, she's a more important character than Doctor Strange himself, and what they do with her character is great. Now ultimately, you absolutely have to have seen WandaVision to really get where they're going with her character. A lot of the heavy lifting for her character comes from WandaVision. For audiences who haven't seen that series, it will be very jarring to see the transition she has made in this movie, because she is just straight up a villain here, and if the last movie you saw was Endgame, then it will be weird to see how she's now a villain. But if you've seen WandaVision, you really do understand where she's coming from, the journey she's been on, what she's lost, and why she's willing to do anything to get that back. So as someone who saw WandaVision and really enjoyed it and connected with it, I really like seeing the next stage of her journey, and I'm actually quite impressed that they were willing to make her a straight up villain here. As an actress, she brings so much to this villainous role. There's a lot of sympathy when it's needed. You understand where she's coming from. But she's also extremely scary. She's creepy, she feels powerful, she has a great screen presence, and she's also having fun with it. You can tell that as an actress she is loving that they're letting her loose and unleashing her full power and potential as the Scarlet Witch, and she's just loving it. And you can just feel all of that come together on screen to create this amazing and interesting character. All of the other actors and characters, Doctor Strange, Wong, Christine Palmer, are all great, and they all have interesting things to do here, along with America Chavez, the new addition to the MCU. I really enjoyed her character and she fit in nicely, but it really is Wanda who is doing the heavy lifting here with a standout performance. The story in this movie is surprisingly simple. I was expecting a big multiversal scale story that spanned multiple universes with big world-ending stakes, but that really isn't what this movie is. I think a lot can be said about the marketing which sold this movie as a very different type of film that made it feel like this big event, but actually it's a very small and personal story about Wanda. Doctor Strange as a character here has two key arcs. One about whether he is happy, and the other about making mistakes across universes and trying to be the version of himself who doesn't make those mistakes. The arc about being happy felt a bit forced, but the idea that Doctor Strange is doomed to make mistakes across the universes was interesting. It looks at how Doctor Strange is willing to bend the rules to save the day, but this has led him to making mistakes across the multiverse. We saw this in the first Doctor Strange movie, with him using the Time Stone to defeat Dormammu. Again, in Infinity War, how he was willing to look through the multiple possibilities of the Thanos fight. And again, in this movie, we see him having to give in to the dark magic, which he had previously criticised Wanda for using earlier. I enjoyed this arc because this is what sets Doctor Strange apart from some of these other superheroes. He is willing to do anything to save the day. The story itself is quite a mixed bag. The first act of the film I think is quite strong, following Doctor Strange, and we see what he's up to and what his life has been like post the snap. We see him get to be a superhero in New York, and that side of it feels a bit more like Sam Raimi doing Spider-Man, and also more like the classic MCU in tone and visuals. Only when we get to some of the later scenes do the Sam Raimi horror elements start to come into this, like when we meet Wanda and we find out what she's been up to since WandaVision. What I liked about this is that they didn't try and lead us on. They immediately revealed to us that Wanda is the villain, and I appreciate that because so many MCU, superhero and Disney films do the hidden villain reveal, where they hide who the villain is until the third act of the movie. And they could have done that here with Wanda. They could have led us on, have her working with Doctor Strange, and only revealed her to be a villain near the end of the movie. That could have worked, but it's been done so many times. So I really appreciated that this film said, Wanda is the villain, this is what she wants, and then went on with the plot and started moving things forward very quickly. And when Wanda is revealed to be the villain, that's when the horror elements start to come through. Wanda starts to have a lot more fun, and we get to see a lot more of Sam Raimi's tone, and things start to feel less like the MCU. However, the second act is where I think things start to go downhill. Act 2 is the multiverse element of the film, where Doctor Strange and America Chavez get knocked through the multiverse and have to try and escape and find their way home. So this portion of the film is really what the title of the movie is referring to. But this is actually the least interesting part of the movie. The multiverse is only really prevalent during this second act, and it doesn't really have any effect on the plot. The multiverse aspects of this movie could entirely be cut out, and the movie would still be the same, because there's no real plot to the multiverse stuff. It's just about them travelling through the multiverse to try and get home. Nothing really happened along the way. Again, for a movie called Multiverse of Madness, it gives you some madness, but it doesn't really give you much multiverse. They only visit 2 universes, and that's very disappointing in my opinion. The trailers showed them flying through multiple realities quickly after each other, but they only really stepped foot and spent time in 2 other universes, both of which are in New York settings. Not very imaginative. And I think this movie could have benefited from showing us more universes with more unique things going on. I mean, the only real variation between universes are people's haircuts. One Doctor Strange has a ponytail, and in the other, Doctor Strange doesn't have a beard. Now, I don't know about you, but that's Multiverse of Madness right there. That's basically as imaginative as they get for the different universe versions of each character. Every single one of the universes we saw the characters fall through in the trailer looked more interesting than the universes we actually got to spend time in. And the movie is short, it's quite fast paced, but when things get to this second act, things really slow down to a halt because the story doesn't really progress while we're in these universes. And the main universe we go to pretty much only exists for the sake of putting cameos in the film. That is fundamentally why the screenwriters take us there, because they want to have a scene where they can put alternate versions of the characters in the movie. Honestly, going into this movie, I was a bit nervous that this was going to be a massive cameo-filled movie that was so focused on references to past Marvel movies and comics that it was going to give us very little story. So I was actually very pleasantly surprised that they were restrained with the cameos they gave us, and they just limited it to basically this one scene. That said, I don't think the cameos they gave us were very interesting or imaginative. I'm not going to spoil the cameos here, and I do plan to make a video talking about the cameos and how I think they could have been more effective in the future, but for now, just know that I thought they were fun, but didn't benefit the story. Only one of the cameos actually surprised me, the other one was predictable, and the other 3 were spoiled by the trailer or marketing materials, because the trailers showed us so much, it gave the impression that they were holding even more back. But this really wasn't the case. But the biggest problem with the cameos is that they have no emotional weight, because they have no connection to Doctor Strange or Wanda, and as the audience, we have no connection to these versions of the characters. so the way they are used doesn't benefit the story or the characters. It just feels like they are here for the audience. The whole movie slows down to involve these characters. They don't benefit the story. Look, overall, the cameos feel forced. While they are fun, they aren't particularly imaginative and don't benefit the story in any way. I'm pleased that the movie wasn't a massive cameo fest. I wasn't coming into this movie hoping for crazy cameos, but I did feel like they could have done more to make these cameos work better. That said, Act 2 does continue to have some great horror aspects, like surprisingly brutal deaths and an intense chase scene. And when we get to Act 3, the plot begins to get more interesting again, as things are out of the multiverse and more personal. This movie is best when it's telling Wanda's story or having fun with the horror aspects, and that's exactly what the third act does. Finally, I don't think the title of this movie is very good. Like I said, the multiverse was only a small aspect of this film, and the title and trailers made it feel like this was going to be a major multiversal event, which it isn't. This is just the introduction to the multiverse, really. The movie should be called something like Doctor Strange, The Scarlet Dream. If you've seen the film, you'll understand why, but I think that represents the movie better, because this really is not a multiverse movie. It's a character story about Wanda, which happens to go into 2 alternate universes, but it really doesn't feel like the Multiverse of Madness. And with a more appropriate title and less revealing trailers, I think fans would have expected a movie closer to what we got, rather than a title and trailer that promised something very different. What we got wasn't bad, it was just different. Overall, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is a mixed bag. It has weird pacing with a strong first and final act, but it's bogged down by a slow middle act which felt like it forced cameos into it. The middle act should have been the most interesting part of the movie, but it wasn't. For a movie called Multiverse of Madness, it really wasn't interested in the multiverse and felt like it missed some opportunities and played it safe with the multiverse. However, where it did take risks was with its horror direction, which really paid off and made this movie unique. It took Wanda's story in an interesting direction and was boosted by a fantastic performance. Sam Raimi's direction really stood out in a shared universe where directors' voices can often get suppressed. It's actually a very small, personal story which felt refreshing for the MCU. This movie feels like it's at war with itself and unsure whether to give us a small, personal story about Wanda or a multiversal Doctor Strange movie focused on fan service. And it leaves Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness feeling messy, but fun. As I mentioned earlier, I plan to make a video looking at the cameos from this movie in a bit more detail and how I would change them to give them more connection to the story and the characters, so be sure to subscribe if you want to see that. Make sure to let me know what you thought about this movie in the comments below. I know this movie has split audiences quite a bit, so I'd be excited to hear your thoughts. Be sure to like and subscribe because it really helps my channel out, and there will be more videos coming soon. And for now, thanks for watching Cinemaze.